So today what I'd like to talk about is the executive branch, right? Yesterday we learned about the legislative branch and how the legislative branch makes the laws. Today we're going to learn about the executive branch. The executive branch enforces the laws. So you might remember at the beginning of our country, we had the Articles of Confederation. It was a very weak government, and one of the weaknesses was the fact that there was no mechanism, no part of the government to enforce the laws. Basically, the Congress would pass a law or a tax and just sort of hope that the states went along. Well, in order to set up someone to enforce the law, we wrote the Constitution, and within the Constitution, in Article 2, we set up the executive branch, which enforces the laws. The executive branch is made up of the president, the vice president, and his or someday her cabinet. So these folks all work with the president to make sure that the laws are carried out or executed or enforced. And basically the president has many different roles. So the vice president, the cabinet help the president to perform these roles. Now, as time has gone on, not all these roles are specifically spelled out in the Constitution, but most of them are, and the couple that are not, you'll sort of be able to recognize just how they've come to be just from the evolution of American politics. So again, the president has many roles, sort of wears many different hats, does many different things as president. First off, the president is commander-in-chief. As commander-in-chief, the president leads the military. Basically, all military decisions ultimately fall to the president. Now, typically, presidents, they will appoint generals and admirals and people in charge of the military, and they generally defer to their military leaders' decisions. That being said, throughout history, there's also been presidents that have directly directed the military what to do. We just saw in that video about Abraham Lincoln, how he specifically directed via telegraph some of his generals what to do. I know during the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson directed where different sites should be bombed. So ultimately, all military decisions fall back to the president. You might recall, though, from yesterday, only Congress can declare war. So president can't declare war, but once war is declared, it's up to the president to direct the military. Another role of the president is chief executive. As chief executive, the president enforces national laws. He's sort of like the top cop for the United States. He makes sure that once Congress passes a law, of course, that he signed it, or if they overrode a veto, that law gets enforced. He does this typically through all kinds of agencies. So, for example, an environmental law will be enforced by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, while the Environmental Protection Agency ultimately answers to the president. The FBI ultimately answers to the president. The DEA, all these different organizations, the IRS, all these different bureaus and stuff that enforce the laws ultimately answer to the president, who is the chief executive. As chief executive, the president can also issue executive orders. Executive orders are kind of like laws. They carry the force of law. They can't contradict a law that exists. But the thing with an executive order is it can be overturned by the following president. So this is where they differ from laws. Once a law is written, all presidents must enforce it as long as that law is still on the books. A executive order can be changed by the following president. There's quite a bit of controversy between Obama and Trump over different executive orders that were passed and whether or not they should be continued to be enforced or not. Particularly right now, there's one in the news related to immigration. But executive orders, it sort of falls under this chief executive function. The president also appoints a cabinet as well as other officials. So Department of Homeland Security and Department of Agriculture and Department of State, Secretary of Treasury, all these different departments, cabinet members, they are appointed by the president with the approval of the Senate, who has to vote to approve those appointments. The president is also chief of state, chief diplomat. Now, I combine these two roles because I sort of think that they fit together. The idea is as chief of state, chief diplomat, the president represents the nation. So the president is supposed to represent you and me and everybody else in the United States in various functions. So, for example, if the president might throw out the first pitch at the World Series because baseball is a really popular game in the United States, and so he's sort of representing all of us at the World Series. Or the president, as chief diplomat, will work things out. Right now you've heard about President Trump. He's trying to work out a deal to denuclearize North Korea, take away their nuclear weapons, or get them to get rid of their nuclear weapons. He's acting in his role of chief diplomat. So as chief of state, chief diplomat, the president represents the entire nation, both here at home, sort of ceremonially, as well as with foreign countries. He deals with foreign countries typically through ambassadors and treaties. So the president, he doesn't go all the time directly to meet with leaders of other countries, but he appoints the ambassadors that do so. The president also formulates treaties with other countries, so maybe a trade agreement or a defense agreement. We in another country might defend each other if there's a war. The president writes those treaties, works those treaties out, again, with the approval of the Senate, though. So the Senate must approve any treaties with a 2/3 vote, actually. So the president's got to be pretty careful with how he deals with foreign countries. The president is a legislative leader, right? We learned about the legislative branch, and the president is kind of the leader of the legislative process. And the couple things he does in that capacity, in that role, is he proposes, approves, and vetoes laws. So it's the president's responsibility in this role to come up with the ideas for laws that maybe there's a problem that a law will solve. The president can also approve a law. If he signs a bill, it becomes a law, or he can also veto a bill. If he vetoes it, of course, we learned the other day, it goes back to Congress, who can override the veto. As legislative leader, the president is also supposed to prepare a national budget. The president's supposed to put together a plan of here's what we're going to spend, here's how much we're going to take in for taxes, and here's the plan. He's supposed to make that plan, send it to Congress, and then Congress works it through the legislative process, changing or amending it as they see fit. So as legislative leader, the president's supposed to prepare a national budget. The president is also a judicial leader. The president's a judicial leader. He appoints Supreme Court and federal judges. So any Supreme Court or federal judge that gets appointed is actually appointed by the president with the approval of the Senate. This is a pretty significant power because federal judges serve for life. They serve until they die or retire. So a president, he might only serve 4 or 8 years, but he could appoint a judge or judges that serve for 10, 20, 30 years even after that president is gone. So typically as judicial leader, a president's going to pick a judge that favors sort of his political view, especially with respect to interpreting the Constitution. So a more conservative president will appoint more conservative judges who maybe have a stricter reading of the Constitution, stricter interpretation of the Constitution, and a liberal president's going to appoint more liberal judges who would have a maybe looser interpretation of the Constitution. But regardless, as judicial leader, the president will have a lasting impact on the judiciary and really the United States generally. Also, as judicial leader, the president can issue pardons and reprieves. The president has the power to pardon people of crimes. Even if somebody's convicted or in jail, the president can pardon them. And this can sometimes be a somewhat controversial power as people vie for the president to pardon them for different crimes. A lot of times at the end of presidencies, in the last few months of a president's term, he may issue, or someday she may issue, a bunch of pardons to people. As an example, I know Barack Obama pardoned many people who were in jail for drug crimes, feeling like drug crimes weren't violent crimes and that perhaps the war on drugs inadvertently keeps people or punishes people too harshly. So there were people released, people pardoned by Barack Obama during his presidency. Recently, Donald Trump has pardoned a controversial sheriff from the South. And this controversial sheriff, I believe he's from Arizona, was pardoned, and people are saying that the guy should not have been pardoned, that he was convicted of things that Donald Trump should not have excused him for. But regardless, this is one of the powers of the president. Finally, the one non-constitutional role of the president is party leader. The president basically supports his or someday her political party and gives it direction. So ultimately, political parties look to the president to guide their parties and give them ideas and direction and leadership. And many people feel like presidents deserve a lot of credit for a party's success, and certainly that's true with the president as party leader. So in summary, the executive branch, it really focuses on the president and somewhat the vice president, his cabinet, and the president has many different roles, many different jobs that he does, again, or someday she. Commander-in-Chief, Chief Executive, Chief of State, Chief Diplomat, Legislative Leader, Judicial Leader, and Party Leader. I hope this helps, and make sure you study for quizzes and tests. Have a great day.